What if instead of shining bright, the crown trembled? Behind the glamorous tiaras, the lavish dinners, and the impeccably rehearsed waves lies a lineage cloaked in shadow. Stories of addiction, indulgence, and the silent disintegration of royals burdened by too much power and too little peace. From laudanum-laden monarchs to cocaine-fueled soirees in grand palaces, these events aren't the tales typically told. No, they are the scandals long hidden within marble crypts and mirrored chambers. This is the concealed saga of the House of Windsor and beyond, 30 names steeped in an unspoken epidemic. Welcome to the narrative of the 30 most notorious British royal addicts. Before we delve deeper, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. This journey promises to take you into the depths of history that you won't want to overlook. Leave us a comment about where you're tuning in from and what time it is, be it midnight in Manchester or 3 a.m. in Toronto. We see you, night owls. Let's begin with our first subject, George IV. Picture a man so excessively indulgent, so captivated by his own image, that even his doctors felt compelled to deceive him about the precariousness of his health, all to prevent another opium-fueled outburst. That man was George IV, King of the United Kingdom, but, more crucially for our tale, one of history's most ostentatious addicts cloaked in royal fabric. He didn't merely flirt with substances. He was a master of laudanum, brandy, and port, embodying the intoxicating blend of the Regency-era's pharmacies and 18th-century taverns. Upon his ascension to the throne, reports suggested his liver resembled a cannonball, and he had expanded to such a size that tailors measured him horizontally. His servants, when not bribing journalists for discretion, affectionately labelled him the Prince of Wales. Nonetheless, behind the dazzling display of powdered wigs and elegant slippers lay a far more tragic truth. George IV was a soul attempting to numb his existence, grappling with illness and insecurity. A hypochondriac plagued by anxiety, an overeating binge drinker who also tried starvation diets, he was a paranoid figure who once attempted to build a private chapel in his palace to avoid confronting crowds. Drowning in self-loathing, intoxicated by illusions, and perpetually in debt to the fantasies he fostered, laudanum became his most steadfast friend, not his wife, Caroline of Brunswick, whom he openly loathed, and certainly not his fleeting mistresses or the ever-changing courtiers around him. Laudanum dulled the pain, calmed his nerves, and silenced the ceaseless whispers within. And let us not overlook his drinking habits. He imbibed as if chasing away a spectre. Dinners would commence with cherries, traverse through wines and ports, and culminate in a flowing river of brandy akin to confession. It was a ritual, a pharmaceutical liturgy meant to numb his anguished spirit. When digestion faltered, he simply commenced drinking earlier each day. The wine lists at Carlton House resembled pharmacy prescriptions. Ironically, despite his excesses, George IV remained acutely aware of appearances. He was a royal influencer long before social media existed, obsessively curating his public image to the extent that he commissioned portraits to slim down his face, effectively an early version of Photoshop. Yet, vanity could not mask the damage. In his twilight years, he had ballooned to the point where he struggled to walk without help. His sight dwindled, and his breath was said to carry the decay from his lifestyle. George IV passed away engulfed in laudanum and painkillers, still clinging to the illusion of adoration, still reigning over his court of shadows. What remains of a monarch who used his crown as a barrier from the realm he commanded? One learns that power can act not as protection but as a shield against reality, an addiction cloaked in royal garb. Yet, George IV was not alone in this perilous dance of indulgence. His successor would navigate similar waters, but with stilettos on, a cigarette in one hand, and laughter that echoed defiance in the other. Enter Princess Margaret. 2. Princess Margaret. She once confessed, I have always feared becoming a non-entity. Yet, her worries were misplaced. What she became was far more tragic. An icon of gradual decline, her legacy enveloped in press clippings, swirling cigarette smoke, and a glossy layer of gin that glossed over her life. Margaret played the role of the younger sister, the spare member of the Windsor lineup. While Elizabeth adhered strictly to duty and a demeanor bolstered by emotional shields, Margaret sparked the intrigue and revelled in the chaos. Glamorous, capricious, sharp-tongued, she never intended to be history's forgotten footnote. But as time passed, she relied increasingly on alcohol to maintain her performance. It commenced subtly, as it often does, perhaps a cocktail at lunch, a scotch before events, champagne simply because it was Tuesday. The royal life was regimented and stifling. Yet, Margaret knew how to pry it open, transforming her existence into a sort of private cabaret, where the piano might be slightly out of tune and sobriety was optional. In public, she radiated charm, but behind closed doors, her drinks served a darker purpose. They were not merely for glamour. They transformed her loneliness into something manageable, echoed the emptiness that hung heavily over her royal role. By the 1970s, the whispers had morphed into headlines. The storied parties on Mystique grew legendary, barefoot escapades under island sunsets, surrounded by celebrities and socialites, a tableau that had the tabloids clamoring for more. Rock stars, playboys, and the occasional mystic came and went like decorative features of her life. It was paradise, if one could overlook the inevitable emotional repercussions. Margaret recognized the pain beneath the glitz but chose to numb it with vodka, Valium, and afternoons that ebbed into long silences. These were not drinks of celebration, but sedation, an antidote to the ravaging loneliness, the constant comparisons to her sister, whose reign became progressively solemn as Margaret's own world began to collapse. She became known for chain-smoking and a relentless pursuit of appearances, navigating the media with the careful craft of one who anticipated the headlines yet remained steadfast in her narrative. Over time, her public outings became erratic, her private actions increasingly volatile. Medical emergencies punctuated her life. A mild stroke in the 1990s, a scalding bath incident, her once graceful movements growing frail. The palace remained largely silent, as royals do, enduring rather than explaining. In her final years, Margaret was but a shadow of her own legend, illuminated, stylish, yet slowly fading. Years of torment had taken their toll on her body, her social network dwindling, her role rendered redundant in a family defined by ceremonial duties. She passed at 71, not young, yet not quite old, especially given her privileged station. Ultimately, strokes and illness claimed her, yet the real harm had occurred long before. However, Margaret wasn't truly attempting to flee the monarchy. She embodied its turmoil, a vivid reflection of its complexity. For each formal wave from Elizabeth's gloved hand, there was Margaret lifting a cigarette. For every grand speech, an understated insult echoed. She represented rebellion in sleek silk, grappling with addiction as a means to cope with the haunting loneliness of her secondary status. But she was not the originator of the royal smoking ritual. That legacy belongs to the man who minted both cigars and controversy. He was a king, steeped in enough nicotine to spark a scandal, Edward III. Now, if you're still with us after 2 royal sagas and a sea of LD Noon and gin, you share the curiosity we seek to engage. Subscribe to follow our journey deeper into this enigma, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from and the time. Are you joining us over morning coffee or late-night restlessness? Whatever the case, the tale has only just begun. In the tapestry of history, we find Edward VII, a figure wrapped in layers of complexity. If George IV represented the epitome of royal excess, and Princess Margaret served as a somber reflection. Then Edward stood as the embodiment of indulgence. His reign may have been brief, yet his quest for pleasure stretched far beyond the throne. Long before the world recognized him as the uncle of Europe, or the crown adorned his brow, Edward, fondly known as Bertie, had already captured the fascination of society, a man ensnared in whispers of the monarchy. A bon vivant before the term graced common parlance, he could easily transform a dinner into a theatrical event, turning a cigar into a centerpiece, and crafting the evening's escapades into delightful tales. However, behind his magnetic charisma and jovial spirit lay dependencies that remained unspoken in genteel circles. Served on silver platters, his vices screamed extravagance. By today's standards, he grappled with every conceivable addiction, seeking solace in the inhalation of smoke, the pouring of fine liquor, and extravagant meals. His staggering tobacco consumption would have kept a plantation thriving. 20 cigarettes, 12 cigars daily, an ever-present cloud of smoke trailing him through royal halls. While doctors referred to this as nervous tension, most would simply deem it a compulsion, a constant companion in his life. A jewel-encrusted cigarette case never strayed from his side, and lighting one was less a habit than a ceremonial act, a break between diplomacy, a flourish after wit, an exhalation after scandal. To forego smoking would disrupt the very atmosphere around him. Each puff became a breath of indulgence. Yet, Edward's excess wasn't confined to tobacco. His passion for dining rivaled, if not eclipsed, his love for monarchy. His feasts were legendary, stretching from twilight to dawn, with menus of absurd length. The renowned personal chef, Auguste Escoffier, once described his appetite as majestic, a polite euphemism for the impossible. Champagne flowed freely, accompanied by brandy as a loyal aid. Dining with Edward meant surrendering one's health to royal etiquette. Beneath the layers of indulgence, Edward was a captivating paradox, publicly promoting moral conservatism while indulging in libertine practices behind closed doors. He valued social decorum even as he shattered its boundaries nightly. His excesses became a public performance, almost revolutionary against the backdrop of an era steeped in repression. When he took the throne in 1901, he was hailed not as a reckless prince, but as a worldly king, celebrated for the very vices that had appalled his mother, Queen Victoria. Edward offered a breath of fresh air, ironic in its essence, even as his own breath turned treacherous. His smoking habit had infiltrated his lungs, alarming his doctors even as he sought distraction through it. Illness may have slowed him, but even amid turmoil, he remained steadfast, taking time for a cigar as the world crumbled around him. His passing in 1910, cloaked in dignity yet steeped in irony, marked the end of a king who had mesmerized many into overlooking his shortcomings. Edward VI's legacy was that of excess. He did not merely smoke, he established a precedent for an entire dynasty. His heirs would inherit both his crown and his compulsions, though more discreetly. One son, in particular, would carry this torch to its most profound depths, forsaking cigars for morphine, exchanging decorum for decay. 4. George V. If Edward III was the sovereign of indulgence, George V stood as the monarch of restraint. At least, that was the narrative woven by propaganda. Yet, beyond the polished uniforms and meticulous schedules, a hidden dependency lingered, a dependency infused with the sense of tobacco, medicine, and quiet despair. George V's struggle with addiction was far from bombastic. It was a slow, dignified descent, the kind that surreptitiously erodes life. Raised in a lineage where pleasure was public and duty routine, George learned early to mask excess with responsibility. Unlike his flamboyant father and his tormented son, his persona embodied British stoicism, save for his relentless smoking. His fingers bore the permanent stain of nicotine, his voice gravelly, his breath a blend of smoke and mint. There he was, perpetually encapsulated in a wisp of royal haze, lighting one cigarette from the ember of another. For him, tobacco was armor in a palace steeped in whispers. It became his metronome, the rhythm anchoring him amidst chaos. Each state paper signed, every decision made, marked by the scratch of a match. He sought solace in smoking when anxiety gnawed, when solitude enveloped, and when anger surged. This ritual became a source of peace, a comforting habitual practice that masked underlying turmoil. Yet, it was not solely the cigarettes that troubled him. Having navigated 2 world wars and the disintegration of empire, his already fragile health bore the strain. He battled chronic bronchitis, emphysema, and deep fatigue, leading to physicians prescribing morphine and cocaine-laden tonics, common remedies of his time. Each potion intended to soothe his nerves merely wrapped him in a chemical embrace. He was the first modern royal addict, not the scandalous type, but the quiet, dignified version that society tolerates, adorned in medals. No excessive drinking or wild revelries like his father. His pursuit was relief. His body waged a war between tradition and exhaustion. By the 1930s, his decline was evident, coughing through meetings, leaning on cigarettes to dull his pain. The irony did not escape him. His emblem of tranquility was also his demise. When he fell ill in 1936, the public witnessed a staged battle against sickness. The press spoke of his courageous struggle, while the truth remained obscured, his lungs ravaged by smoke. In his final hours, his doctors offered morphine and cocaine, not just for pain, but to ensure his passing predated the morning papers, allowing a more dignified evening announcement. Even his death was meticulously planned. Even his addiction possessed a veneer of decorum. He departed from an empire on the brink of obscurity and a family marred by quiet decay. His children inherited not just his crown but also his compulsive behaviors, learning to carry addiction as a discreet secret, neat, unvoiced, impeccably presented. Among this lineage, one successor would adopt his father's stoic demeanor and infuse it with deeper sorrow. A man whose voice quivered not only from nerves but from nicotine and loss. The next king would not chase pleasure but endurance, known as George VI. Each cigarette he lit became a battle cry against his fears. 5. The reluctant monarch, George VI. History has etched his legacy as a king who never yearned for the crown, yet was thrust into the role through a scandal he never sought. The weight of the crown rested upon him like a sandbag, and he was acutely aware that he did not belong in the spotlight. However, fate, alongside his brother's controversial abdication, had other designs in store for him. In the public eye, George VI was upheld for his steadfastness amid the chaos of war, for triumphing over a stutter, and for his remarkable resilience under pressure. Yet, few understood the true toll it took on him to maintain an unyielding front. His reign was a crucible, amidst relentless bombings and an unending stream of broadcasts meant to soothe a nation besieged. As he spoke calmly to the masses, his hands often trembled, not solely from fear, but from an all-too-familiar source: withdrawal, craving, and strain. His dependence on tobacco became an inseparable aspect of his royal identity. Chain-smoking incessantly became his coping mechanism, with estimates suggesting he consumed more than a pack daily, often lighting one cigarette from the last, his image seldom free from smoke. This habit served as a shield, an invisible escape from a role he had neither desired nor chosen. The stutter he fought against, a lifelong torment, worsened under the crushing weight of stress and scrutiny, and each puff of smoke silently apologized for the pauses and ungraspable words that eluded him. As the years progressed, George's reliance on cigarettes matured into a medical ailment. Chronic lung issues, bronchitis, and debilitating fatigue grew more pronounced, much to the concern of his doctors. Yet they hesitated to advise him to cease, an action deemed unfathomable in an era that prescribed smoking as a remedy for nerves. What king, burdened by the pressures of wartime leadership inherited almost by happenstance, wouldn't be on edge? As the nation looked towards recovery post-war, George's health continued its downward spiral. Surgery for peripheral artery disease in 1948, aggravated by his smoking, was only the beginning of his medical struggles. In 1951, cancer was uncovered, resulting in the removal of a lung section, marking a pivotal moment yet not a conclusion to his addiction. Reports suggest that despite the diagnosis and visible decay, he stubbornly continued to smoke. This wasn't merely addiction, it was a blend of devotion and denial. Those around him then bore witness to his physical decline. Public appearances dwindled. They became shorter and meticulously choreographed. Still, as the steadfast figure of monarchy, George managed to show up, appearing ever more pale and frail in his last months. The camera that once captured his strength now exposed the exhaustion written across his face. In February 1952, after a relatively serene evening at Sandringham, he passed away in his sleep, officially attributed to lung cancer, heart strain, and overexertion, causes that hardly shocked anyone. Yet, perhaps the simplest truth lay in the shadows of his smoking. He puffed away his fears. For a king, fear must always be shrouded. George VI was not only weighty with the burden of a faltering empire but also faced a family in turmoil and deep-rooted insecurities. Each cigarette became a controlled breath, a stolen moment of tranquility in a life devoid of peace. In the aftermath, his daughter would ascend the throne, embodying stoicism and poise, while his brother, the abdicator who prioritized liberty over duty, had already charted his own course across the Atlantic, indulging in a life of revelry with parties, palm trees, and towering martinis. He was Edward VII or, if preferred, the Duke of Windsor. 6. Edward VII. When a man relinquishes a crown for love, the world composes sonnets in his honor. Yet, if he relinquishes it for freedom, for cocktail hours and tailored suits, the melody shifts to a bitter tune. Edward VIII, who later became the Duke of Windsor, stands as one of the most controversial figures in the annals of British royalty. His abdication is not the sole reason for his infamy, but rather the enduring mythology of decadence that trailed behind him like a lingering scent. At the heart of this narrative lies a lifestyle drenched in alcohol, cigarettes, and the heavy weight of irreversible choices. From the outset, Edward seemed ill-suited for the throne. He lacked the patience, discipline, and crucially, the resolve to endure hardship. His sense of royal duty resembled a theatrical act, charming and photogenic, yet ultimately lacking true commitment. Behind that dazzling smile lay a man dedicated to indulging in personal pleasures. By the time he ascended the throne in 1936, he had already garnered a reputation for his love of fast cars, wild parties, and rule-breaking women. Edward spent much of his early adulthood evading royal obligations, embracing a social realm founded not on duty, but on unabashed desire, often expressed under the influence of gin. A notorious heavy drinker by any standard, Edward's evenings rarely concluded sober, and his lunches often commenced with cocktails. His moral compass would often sway in a sea of martinis. The American divorcee Wallace Simpson, for whom he abandoned his royal position, shared his penchant for lavish dinners and nightly libations. Together, they emerged as a sort of exiled royalty, a duo surrounded by crystal flutes and clouds of Parisian smoke. The Duke of Windsor's drinking was not concealed. It became a sort of stylized ritual. 1940s and 50s photographs portray him impeccably dressed, drink in hand, fully embracing the art of aristocratic excess. His beloved beverages included gin, scotch, and champagne, yet his true obsession was far less about any particular drink than the life he led that facilitated endless indulgence. What rendered Edward's addiction extraordinary wasn't its obscurity but rather his sense of entitlement. He didn't plummet into the public eye with dramatic collapses or tabloid scandals. Instead, he glided from gala to gala and dinner to dinner across continents, fading gently into obscurity. The alcohol did not deliver a visible demise. Rather, it dulled him, softening his edges until even the pages of history ceased to take him seriously. And then, of course, there was his smoking. Hardly any photos from his era show him without a cigarette. This habit was not scrutinized. It was expected, a hallmark of royal representation that Edward, the ever-fashionable exile, fully embraced. The outcome was a gradual decline concealed beneath tuxedos and charisma. As the years progressed, the toll of his lifestyle became increasingly evident. His health deteriorated, making him more reclusive, irritable, and prone to long moments of silence and disjointed thoughts. The man who had once struck chords with fascist leaders and defied the Church of England now strolled through a rented existence, propped up by royal stipends and social invitations. He passed away in 1972 after enduring years of illness and distance, with the palace expressing a measured sorrow. By that time, the public had largely forgotten him. Edward VIII drank to blur memories of the crown, yet his nephew, born into scandal, would one day turn to drugs in a quest to erase his own identity. A prince who never anticipated ruling, yet felt profoundly adrift. Unlike Edward, this one would openly share his truth. Meet Prince Harry. 7. Prince Harry. In an extraordinary twist of fate, a royal has chosen to share his own story, shunning the traditional confinement of a scripted life. This is a man who once donned a Nazi outfit for laughs, only to later wear his emotions openly for all to witness. At the heart of his evolution lay a reality that took many by surprise: his openness about addiction. It wasn't merely to one substance. Rather, it was his quest for solace, a tendency to escape through various means. Unlike the royals of old, Harry bypassed the watchful eyes of biographers and journalists who might piece his story together and unveiled it himself, in interviews, documentaries, and, most notably, his memoir. With unflinching honesty, at times unsettlingly so, he discussed the impact of drugs and alcohol on his formative years, from cocaine and cannabis to psychedelic mushrooms. He neither glamorized these substances nor offered apologies. He framed them as indicators of suffering rather than moral failings. In a royal context, the conversation around addiction shifted from hushed whispers to an open declaration. What intrigues us most about Harry's dealings with substances is their unapologetic nature. Absent are the court intrigues or vintage cigars hidden away. Instead, we find a young man openly grappling with pain. His upbringing existed within a constraining bubble of loss and expectation, mourning his mother in front of the world, walking behind her coffin under the nation's gaze. In moments when the depth of his sorrow was overlooked, he sought ways to numb the pain. He acknowledges a foray into cocaine during his teenage years, not seeking pleasure but merely wishing to escape his reality, a solution that fell short yet pushed him to try again. This paved the way for cannabis, often intertwined with alcohol during episodes of solitude or anger, as he partied like a soul trying to dismantle an unrecognizable reflection. Occasionally, he managed to break free, yet the narrative would take an unexpected twist as he matured. As an adult, Harry ventured into psychedelics, particularly magic mushrooms and ayahuasca during therapy retreats. Unlike before, these substances were no longer escapes, they became tools for confrontation. He described these experiences as vital in confronting grief, trauma, and buried memories. In a family renowned for its silence, such self-disclosure was nothing short of groundbreaking. However, this isn't a conventional tale of redemption. Harry hasn't shed every vice and emerged as an ideal representative for mental health. He remains complex, often contradictory, advocating for well-being while simultaneously dragging his family through the media spotlight. The true addiction, it seems, may not lie with substances but with the determination to disrupt cycles in the most dramatic manner. The uniqueness of Harry's case doesn't stem from the substances themselves, but from his radical honesty. By laying bare his suffering, he tells a tale that many royals choose to suppress behind duty and decorum. His journey with substances transforms from a mere detail into the core of his identity. Once, he drank to escape. Now, he speaks to remember. The interpretation of this act as brave or self-indulgent varies with the audience. Yet, in unmasking his truth, Harry ventured where few royals have tread, dismantling the misconception that royal birth grants immunity from human frailties. If past kings like George V suppressed their fears with smoke and Edward VII used drink to numb exile, Harry's path represents a distinct endeavor to break free from generations of constricted emotions. He isn't the first royal to incorporate substance use into a daily existence. Long before him, a certain queen, known for her fondness for brandy, garnered a nickname that floated through the air, both behind fans and within clever satire. This was Queen Anne, affectionately termed Brandy Nan. 8. The tragic legacy of Queen Anne. In the annals of history, queens have often faced unrelenting scrutiny, and Queen Anne was no exception. Between 1702 and 1714, she ascended to the throne as the last monarch of the House of Stuart and emerged as the inaugural queen of a unified Great Britain following the merger of England and Scotland. Yet, her legacy is overshadowed by her personal trials, sorrowful losses, chronic ailments, and a dependency that many whispered about in the shadows. Dubbed Brandy Nan, this nickname circulated not only among the elite but also in biting pamphlets and bustling coffee houses, where gossip mirrored the darkest ink. For much of her life, Anne's association with brandy was second nature, as familiar to her as the morning brew. Enduring relentless physical pain from gout, dropsy, and presumed autoimmune troubles, her body waged a constant battle against her well-being. Walking often proved impossible, her joints grotesquely swollen, leaving her bedridden more than not. While modern minds ponder the possibility of lupus or rheumatoid arthritis, contemporaneous doctors opted for the diagnosis of mere weakness, as if her afflictions were a shameful burden. Enter the cure, brandy. Touted as both a soothing tonic and a social lubricant, for Anne, it transcended mere indulgence. It was a balm against bodily torment, a soothing elixir for her troubled mind, and a means to palliate the unbearable pain of losing 17 pregnancies, miserable shadows that loomed over her. The only surviving seed, Prince William, was snatched away too soon, dying at the tender age of 11. This unfathomable grief often led her to seek solace, not in dramatic displays of revelry, but rather through the clandestine embrace of brandy, always within reach. At first, her consumption was modest. It crept into her daily life, seamlessly intertwining with her evening prayers and intimate letters written to her confidante, Sarah Churchill. These exchanges would soon spark their own whirlwind of speculation and intrigue. Anne's pattern of drinking, however, was neither scandalous nor flamboyant. Rather, it unfolded quietly, shrouded in the weight of noble traditions. There were no public breakdowns or spectacles. Instead, her clarity gradually ebbed away, erased by the amber spirit and constant suffering. Those surrounding her spoke cautiously about her declining health, and while new remedies were offered, brandy remained a steadfast comfort, one of the few pleasures still under her command. By the twilight of her reign, and had become a mere shadow of her former self, swollen, withdrawn, and often muddle-headed. Her speech faltered, not just from her ailments, but from an ingrained routine of consumption that had long abandoned its therapeutic roots. Her rule ended as it began, fraught with negotiations and tension, and passed away in 1714, enveloped in a state of unconscious exhaustion, her circle not comprised of lost children but of anxious officials squabbling over the future throne. Strikingly modern in its essence, her struggle reveals the poignant interplay between grief and dependency, where power obscured the truth of addiction. In the greater narrative of history, and would become a figure remembered mostly by her nickname, while her profound suffering faded into obscurity. However, she wasn't the first royal to grapple with the damaging effects of drink. Long before and raised her goblet in solitude, another figure sailed through a tempest of spirits and chaos, Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. His thirst for alcohol wasn't a mere escape. It unleashed havoc, bringing ruin upon himself and others. Thus, the story unfolds like a haunting echo through the corridors of time. 9. Henry Stuart, known as Lord Darnley. If there exists a cautionary legend in the annals of monarchy regarding the perils of an ill-fated union, it is undoubtedly the tale of Darnley, spouse to Mary, Queen of Scots, progenitor to James VI, and tragically a murder victim by the young age of 21. His brief life unfurled into one of history's most erratic royal calamities, a man whose craving for drink stood as tumultuous as his unyielding ambition. Enveloped in privilege, his upbringing steeped in entitlement, Darnley made his entry into Mary's realm like an alluring gold coin. Towering, charismatic, and of noble lineage, he appeared to be the quintessential political partner. Yet beneath that glimmer, disillusionment awaited, lurking in the shadows. The unraveling began the instant Darnley grasped the bitter truth, that his royal title was forged in matrimony, not in his own birthright. This realization embittered him, driving him to reach for the bottle as his solace from despair. Across historical texts, the extent of his alcohol consumption varies, but the agreement is clear. Darnley drank heavily, not subtly or stylishly, but with alarming volatility and often in full view of the court. Observers chronicled his drunken antics at royal gatherings, stumbling through feasts, and offending nobles and foreign ministers after merely 2 glasses of wine. In an age when drinking was rife and somewhat accepted, Darnley's excessive behavior was nonetheless glaring. Yet, alcohol was merely the catalyst. His core issues lay much deeper in his psyche. Haunted by insecurities and plagued by paranoia, he fixated on matters of status and power. He pressured Mary for the crown matrimonial, a title that would elevate him to co-sovereign status, but when she declined, he descended into a spiral of despair. Gin became not just his vice but a means of resistance, of masking anguish, of asserting his masculinity in a court that increasingly deemed him a decorative figure. Then, shadows loomed over them. In 1566, Mary's loyal secretary and confidant, David Rizzio, met a brutal end before her eyes while she was 6 months pregnant. Darnley aligned himself with the Protestant nobles responsible for Rizzio's assassination. His motivation remains murky, perhaps a twisted blend of political strategy and drunken jealousy. Rizzio's closeness to Mary unraveled something dark in Darnley, igniting his rage. Though he fled post-murder, seeking amends and briefly reconciling with Mary, the damage was irrevocable. His reputation lay in shambles. His drinking became more excessive, driving him into self-imposed exile from court, deteriorating both physically and politically. By early 1567, Mary arranged for him to recuperate in a secluded residence near Edinburgh. He would never leave, except in death. The ensuing events became one of history's most notorious unsolved mysteries. One fateful night, the house he inhabited exploded. Danley's lifeless body was discovered in the garden, strangled, unmarked by the flames or debris. Theories proliferated. Could it be retribution? Was it treachery? Was Mary complicit? Or perhaps her future spouse, the Earl of Bothwell, orchestrated the fate of this man who had alienated those around him? One truth resounds. Danley's existence encapsulated a tempest of entitlement, insecurity, and addiction. Instead of finding escape within drink, he amplified his wrath against life's frustrations. He believed royalty was his due, and when that notion shattered, he sought comfort in goblet after goblet. His dependence was driven not by pleasure, but by deep-seated indignation. Yet, despite his turbulent legacy, Danley was not alone in his silent struggles. Decades later, another sovereign would take the throne, draped in mourning, indulging quietly in her personal remedy, one that was bitter yet potent and completely within the law. Her name, Queen Victoria. 10. Prince Rupert of the Rhine. Prince Rupert of the Rhine is a name that echoes through the annals of history, frequently recalled for his audacious adventures, his dynamic cavalry charges, and of course, his flowing locks that danced in the winds of battlefields steeped in the turmoil of the Civil War. Painted as a romanticized symbol of a noble soldier, he embodied the spirit of a daring warrior. Yet, beneath the bold imagery and the lore of the musketeer lies a figure much more complex. He was not merely a war hero, he was an enigmatic blend of pirate, alchemist, and artist, intricately linked as a devoted nephew to King Charles I, a man said to have formed deep emotional bonds with his comrades. Rupert's life began amidst upheaval, thrust into exile from the Palatinate during his youth, arriving in England already burdened by loss. His uncle, Charles I, recognized in him a potent symbol of royal defiance, promoting him to lead the royalist cavalry in the English Civil War. On the battlefield, he distinguished himself, yet off the field, he became a figure of increasing intrigue. Rupert drew around him a tight-knit circle of fellow officers, men who admired his daring spirit, frequently joining him in reckless endeavors, and maintaining a bond that transcended the mere shared experience of war. Among these companions were royalist soldiers with whom Rupert shared not just skirmishes, but long-lasting correspondence, intimate travels, and a closeness that left many warriors pondering its depths. Fragments of their letters survive, tinged with poetic adoration and emotional expression that challenge conventional notions of 17th-century friendship. One particular officer, repeatedly mentioned in Rupert's letters, was described as his steadfast companion, cherished above all. Legends tell of Rupert refusing to abandon this officer, even amid the chaos of battle. When this beloved comrade perished, Rupert sank into profound sorrow, retreating into solitude and reportedly abstaining from food for several days. To some, it was a noble expression of grief. To others, it hinted at a deeper complexity, an affection that transcended the boundaries of the battlefield's traditional ideals of masculinity. Publicly, Rupert's persona remained stanchly heterosexual. In the years following the war, he ventured into overseas trade, engaged in hunting pirates, and pursued scientific endeavors, ever the restless spirit. He never took a wife, yet fathered an acknowledged illegitimate daughter, a testament to his potency, no doubt. Nevertheless, the nature of his closest ties, formed in blood-soaked camps rather than courtly halls, stubbornly defies simple interpretation. The intricacies lie within Rupert himself. He was a man of intense emotion, forming rapid attachments and expressing sentiments that resembled devotion more than mere camaraderie. In court, some deemed him arrogant. Amongst his troops, his charisma shone brightly. Meanwhile, rivals often recorded his name alongside language typically reserved for lovers, obscuring the boundaries between friendship and passion. Ultimately, Rupert's life drew to a close not amidst clashing swords, but within the walls of his study, a man of invention and royal rebellion, whose public persona remained at odds with the intensity of the connections he forged. His legacy was neatly packaged, crafted into the myth of a romantic war hero, comfortably heterosexual, and simplistically noble. Still, the patterns of his life reveal a convergence of men, amidst royalty and cannon fire, who repeatedly found solace in each other's company. The story of the next royal in this quiet lineage would remain cloaked in uniforms and formality, revealing just enough to provoke curiosity yet withholding enough to leave questions unanswered. In the intriguing tapestry of royal history, there exists a figure that captures intrigue with his very essence, Prince George, Duke of Kent. With his striking looks and a spirit that exuded charisma, George was no ordinary royal. He was a man whose life danced between elegance and chaos. Born amidst the fading glow of the Edwardian era, he was the fifth child of King George V and Queen Mary, embodying the paradox of nobility and rebellion. Though born into privilege, George's destiny tangled with darker truths, as whispers suggest he faced a profound struggle with addiction, a narrative cloaked in both tragedy and opulence. Official records are scant, a preference of the Windsor dynasty, yet the tales surrounding the Duke of Kent have evolved into a kind of mythos among historians and biographers. Central to this narrative is his rumored entanglement with drugs, especially morphine and cocaine, implying a tormented pursuit to escape through the decadence of 1920s high society. His social circle included the infamous Kiki Preston, a glamorous American socialite notorious for her lavish lifestyle intertwined with narcotics. Together, they navigated a world of vice that raised eyebrows within the British elite, where George's vibrant charm was seen as a dangerous double-edged sword. Beneath the impeccable facade lay a man adrift in his own identity, a decorated naval officer, a passionate music lover, a pioneer in aviation, and speculated to be bisexual. His life was a series of compartments, each reflecting not deceit, but an instinctive survival amidst the relentless pressures of royal expectations. Addiction seemed to creep in, offering a simultaneous allure of numbness amid the relentless contradictions of life in the limelight. Despite the shadows of speculation, his tragic fate was a mystery shrouded in confusion, culminating in a plane crash during World War II in 1942. Official narratives attributed it to poor weather, yet questions abound. What was he doing on that flight? Who accompanied him? And could the turbulence of his life have guided him to his untimely end? What remains is a haunting portrait of a prince who, perhaps too vividly, embodied the extremes of life, illuminating the truth that addiction runs deeper within royal veins than often acknowledged. Prince George's struggles echo a larger story within the monarchy, a narrative long veiled yet familiar, whispering that excess and its consequences are not rare in royal circles. His cousin, Prince Albert Victor, known as Eddie, too fell prey to a life shrouded in whispers and secrets, marking a history of indulgence that never truly fades. In the shadows of history, we discover the tale of Prince Albert Victor, affectionately known as Eddie. Born second in line for the British throne, he tragically exited this world shrouded in intrigue, bearing the title Duke of Clarence and Earndale. Eddie's life, devoid of eloquent speeches and scandalous reigns, became a tapestry woven with whispers and rumours, stretching from the opium dens of London to the darkest corners of Victorian speculation. His short existence left scant records, plagued by assertions of excess, frailty, and a disconcerting habit of venturing into realms unfit for royal lineage. Entering the world in 1864 as the child of the future Edward VII and Queen Alexandra, Eddie was raised within the rigid confines expected of a king. Yet, from early days, it was evident he lacked the mettle for sovereignty. Tutors describe him as slow and easily influenced, with a lackluster academic performance raising hushed concerns about his future on the throne. He meandered through military assignments and public engagements, but none took root in his essence. Behind closed doors, his character leaned towards the idolized and indulgent, becoming the subject of popular narratives the palace sought to suppress. Rumors swirled around him, depicting him in the opulent social scene of London, frequenting gentlemen's clubs and indulging in the late-night festivities, often succumbing to drunken embarrassment. Though typical for the period's elite, such behavior was unnerving for a potential king. While alcohol consumption was commonplace, many speculated Eddie's desires ventured into darker territories. Anecdotes of excessive drinking, flirtations with sedatives, and possibly a dependency on substances painted a portrait of a man trapped in a maze of pleasure and relief. In a time when medical understanding was nebulous and treatments included narcotics, it seemed plausible that Eddie, much like his peers, fell prey to the allure of tonics. His social discomfort was palpable, enveloped in the weight of expectations, and seemingly out of tune with his environment. Some interpreted his indulgences as a means of escape, a subtle rebellion against the chains of privilege. Others offered a psychological lens, suggesting that these rumored vices revealed profound emotional turmoil lying beneath the surface. When death finally visited in 1892, it deepened the enigma. At only 28, Eddie succumbed to pneumonia after a fierce battle with influenza, a swift, tragic end that, while mourned, might have elicited private relief within the royal household. The crown eluded him, sparing them from the intricacies of his troubled life. What remains is merely a silhouette of a prince, his name lingering in conspiracy theories like a spectre, including the notorious but unfounded claim of his involvement in the Jack the Ripper case. Though none of this ever solidified in historical documentation, doubt clung to his memory like a shadow. Eddie navigated his indulgences discreetly, embodying the resignation of someone who understood his time was limited. In this narrative, we often find a recurring theme: royals born without clear purpose, equipped with unparalleled resources, frequently seek escape as their only refuge. Yet, amidst the whispers of excess, some royals do find a path to maturity woven in their vices. One prince, now advanced in years and seldom in the headlines, skirts the edges of rumor and concern, yet remains unconfirmed in his indulgences. He is the Queen's cousin, Prince Michael of Kent, a figure lingering on the periphery for decades. In the intricate tapestry of the British royal family, Prince Michael of Kent emerges as an enigmatic figure, a branch extending close enough to the crown to wield titles and uniforms, yet distant enough to maintain a veil of obscurity. As a cousin to Queen Elizabeth II and a grandson of George V, his striking likeness to Tsar Nicholas II fuels intrigue among history enthusiasts and royal observers. Beneath the surface of regal elegance and adorned medals, whispers pervade historical circles, murmuring about indulgences that hint at a darker side. It's crucial to note, however, that Prince Michael has never acknowledged any substance dependency. No scandal has ever clung to him like a shadow, no tabloid images capturing embarrassing moments in nightlife debauchery. His public facade remains that of understated sophistication, a polyglot, businessman, military figure, and once regarded as one of the most stylish royals worldwide. Yet, the media and aristocratic whispers occasionally resurface concerning rumors of overindulgence, particularly in the vibrant social scenes of his past. These murmurs trace back to the vibrant years of the 1970s and 80s, where Prince Michael, with his handsome features and fluent Russian, mingled seamlessly with Europe's elite. He graced high-profile events alongside lesser-known royals, diplomats, and affluent patrons with hazy histories, moving through a cosmopolitan society where champagne flowed as freely as conversation. It was amidst this lively backdrop that speculation began to swirl regarding his relationship with alcohol, not painted as a tragedy but rather a lifestyle choice. British tabloids revelled in the opportunity to insinuate that beneath his polished demeanour lay a penchant for drink bordering on habitual. Articles hinted at his gourmet appetites and predilection for fine spirits, but none ever escalated to confirmed addiction or genuine public concern, highlighting the delicacy of royal appearances. What renders Prince Michael's narrative captivating is not the abundance of evidence, but the conspicuous absence of it, names cloaked in silence, veiled by tradition and an inherited legacy of discretion. His ties to the royal family have always been informal. Lacking a taxpayer-funded salary or formal responsibilities, he is under no compulsion to justify his lifestyle. This liberty, paired with his nearness to power, has allowed him to navigate a realm of quiet indulgence, largely unexamined and shrouded in royal ennui. While speculation does not equate to fact, the silence surrounding his life evokes a familiarity with patterns seen throughout royal history, entwined with complicated legacies of substance use. The palace may not hide what remains unaccused, yet it is often the undercurrents of whispers that shine the most illuminating light. In stark contrast, some of the loudest rumors emerge not from the shadows, but surrounding those whose lives are endlessly scrutinized. Astoundingly, no royal persona, past or present, has been more fiercely dissected than that of a woman whose life and untimely death have taken on legendary proportions within modern storytelling. Her name was Diana, Princess of Wales. Princess Diana. Captured by cameras more than any other person, she still managed to exist as an enigma throughout her life. Revered as the world's most famous woman, glamorous yet vulnerable, admired yet misunderstood, she embodied contradictions. A royal who defied traditions, a stylish humanitarian, a devoted mother who willingly entertained the tabloids while pleading for solitude. Her life unfolded within the complex interplay of public display and authentic emotion, naturally drawing both admiration and speculation. Among the myriad of whispers surrounding her life, the issue of prescription medication usage floated in the shadows, neither sensational nor blatant, but subtly insinuating itself into conversations. Sleep aids, tranquilizers, mood stabilizers. Such allegations, often cloaked in concern, percolated through unauthorized biographies and insider recollections, occasionally obscured by sensationalist headlines of her personal life. Diana fiercely denied these insinuations, yet the murmurings persisted. To grasp the undercurrents of these speculations, one must understand her circumstances. Diana entered the royal sphere at just 19, unprepared and emotionally vulnerable, stepping into a colder-than-anticipated world. Her marriage began tumultuously, leading her to reveal in interviews and private communications her profound emotional struggles. She spoke candidly about self-harm, battling eating disorders, and plunging into deep depression. Given this backdrop, the suggestion that medication might have been offered to her seems almost natural. In British high society, the tradition of using medication for emotional management is long-standing, a discreet remedy for nerves, a small lifeline for those in distress. For someone as publicly visible and emotionally exposed as Diana, such a pharmacological safety net might have been regarded as both protective and essential. However, the irony of Diana's reality lay in her lack of privacy. The press pored over every detail of her public appearances, scrutinizing her every mood. Her candidness, though rare and often challenging, only escalated speculation, admitting to emotional upheaval, breakdowns, and a sense of losing control. This willingness to share vulnerabilities, which no royal had previously dared to do, led the public to believe there were even more secrets left untold. Nonetheless, it's crucial to differentiate speculation from verified facts. There's no definitive proof of prolonged prescription drug misuse. Close friends in her later years describe a woman who became more self-aware and grounded. She embraced therapy, adapted yoga into her routine, and turned to journaling. If medications entered her life, they appeared to be used responsibly and under professional guidance. What is more revealing than the rumors themselves is the cultural climate in which they thrived. Within the royal family, acknowledging pain had always been a taboo. Yet Diana did not merely acknowledge it, she transformed it into her mission. This boldness sparked a cultural revolution. The public, historically enamored with fairy tale narratives, began to crave authenticity and vulnerability, elements starkly absent from royal representation. This truth rendered Diana a threat to the institution, not because of potential medication use, but because she embodied undeniable humanity. Rejecting the centuries-old practice of masking emotions with formality, she openly wept and expressed pain, leaving the palace in bewilderment. Not every royal managed their emotional struggles with such poise. Some resorted to traditional aristocratic tactics of denial and distraction. One notable figure was a former brother-in-law, whose rebellious youth and escapades overshadowed any emotional turmoil. Prince Andrew. In the world of nobility, a saying echoes, "Discretion is the better part of dynasty." Yet, Prince Andrew seems to have missed that lesson entirely. Once the charming younger brother, a laid-back foil to the serious Prince Charles, Andrew soon embraced a reputation that straddled the line between reckless and scandalous. Dubbed Randy Andy by the tabloids, he became a source of concern for the palace, the air around him thick with the telltale aroma of privilege run rampant. Cigar smoke intertwined with cocktails, a party atmosphere that felt perpetual. While never officially labeled as an addict, Andrew's life was long shadowed by allegations of heavy drinking and excessive revelry. This behavior began after his return from the Falklands War in the 1980s, where he re-entered royal life with an air of invincibility. Tall and confident, he quickly became a staple on London's nightlife scene, hosting gatherings and relishing his role as a royal bachelor, all with a bravado fit for tabloid headlines. Longtime acquaintances and former staff have often alluded to Andrew's fondness for alcohol, particularly in his youth, with references to his status as a heavy social drinker surfacing repeatedly. Although no incriminating photos surfaced, at least none escaped palace scrutiny. Whispers about his behind-the-scenes behavior continued to circulate. Long dinners turned into overly extended toasts and a lifestyle where royal privilege became a passport to excess. This wasn't a tragic addiction, but a more common, insidious lifestyle dependency, a reliance on alcohol as a social lubricant, a way to smooth over awkward encounters. It appeared Andrew indulged as though the world was his safety net. For decades, it seemed to be. As United Kingdom Special Representative for International Trade and Investment in the early 2000s, Andrew's world only expanded, full of foreign dignitaries and opulent receptions. His entertaining reputation even turned the palace wine list into a running joke, a sign to prepare the finest wines. But despite the swirling rumors, no public interventions occurred. The palace and press maintained an uneasy silence. Over time, however, the narrative began to shift. Andrew transitioned from playful to out of touch, a man increasingly burdened by his own lifestyle choices and controversial associations. As scandals piled up, public sightings of the prince dwindled. His face, once radiating youth, grew gaunter, and the joy once ignited by champagne gave way to legal woes and interviews fraught with suspicion. As the palace diverted its attention to damage control, observers noted the fading echo of a man who had sought solace not in admission, but in indulgence. The story of Prince Andrew is not one framed by confirmed addiction, but rather one of evasion, an existence wrapped in privilege where reflection was optional and repercussions could be sidestepped. If his drinking was excessive, nobody dared speak of it. If he sought comfort through parties and privilege, it was merely deemed an aristocratic norm. Yet, within the pages of royal history lie figures whose dependencies were not whispered about, but rather treated with solemnity. One such figure, enduring through wars, revolutions, and visions, was Princess Alice of Battenberg, her royal stature accompanied by fragile mental health, her treatment veiled in sedation. In the storied halls of Windsor Castle, a remarkable life began, Princess Alice of Battenberg. Witness to the tumultuous landscape of the 20th century, her journey was paved with historic upheaval. 2 world wars, the turbulent Russian Revolution, the decline of monarchies, and the emergence of a new royal lineage. Yet, despite her noble lineage, being the mother of Prince Philip and the mother-in-law to Queen Elizabeth II, Alice often flitted in the shadows of history, frequently unnoticed, occasionally mocked, and at times silenced by substances that numbed her reality. An elegant figure, tall and fluent in several languages, Alice's exterior belied a life fraught with challenges. Born deaf, she triumphed over her limitations by mastering the art of lip reading with astonishing aptitude. Her intellect and determination were evident, yet her profound spiritual fervor and bouts of peculiar behavior left her royal contemporaries guessing. Diagnosed in the 1930s with what was then labeled paranoid schizophrenia, a term defined more by stigma than understanding, historians now question this classification, suggesting it was misguided or incomplete. Her emotional fervor, religious zeal, and what might today be identified as biphasic episodes were met with alarm and swift reaction from the royal court. Alice's life spiraled into confinement as she was institutionalized against her will in a Swiss sanatorium, subjected to treatments that favored sedation over genuine healing. Medical records, scarce and tightly controlled, hinted a grim reality where she was subdued by tranquilizers and chemical regimen intended for control rather than recovery. As young Prince Philip navigated life with relatives, his mother remained ensconced within closed clinic walls. Among the notable figures she encountered during her confinement was Sigmund Freud, whose theories presented a harrowing lens through which to view Alice's pain, suggesting that her spiritual intensity stemmed from deep-seated sexual repression. Such interpretations showcase the era's troubling approach to women's emotional well-being, prioritizing strict measures over understanding. Eventually released from institutional life, Alice emerged with newfound determination. She embraced a religious calling, founded a monastic order, and selflessly returned to Greece, where she sheltered Jews from Nazi persecution amid conflict. Living humbly, she rejected royal excess even as others indulged in extravagance. Yet, the specter of her past sedation lingered. Those formative years stolen from her, silenced by chemicals, highlighted the royal tendency to handle inner turmoil with control instead of compassion. As she passed away in Buckingham Palace in 1969, Alice's life was a tapestry woven with tragedy, nobility, and complexity. She stands as a poignant reminder that not all dependencies are visible. Some are found in bottles and prescriptions, ostensibly offered for tranquility yet used as tools for compliance. Long before mental health diagnoses were recognized, one king's indulgence would confound modern doctors, Henry VIII, whose thirst was legendary and whose daily consumption was simply another form of his own need. In the annals of history, few figures are as prominent as Henry VIII, the monarch whose legacy is entwined with 6 marriages, notorious beheadings, and a monumental rift with the Catholic Church. He is often remembered for both his marital escapades and his corpulent physique. However, beneath this well-known facade lies an aspect less frequently discussed. By today's standards, he would likely be labeled an alcoholic. Yet, in the 16th century, such terminology was unheard of, and to ascribe it to the King of England would have been unthinkable. The evidence is compelling. A wealth of court records illustrates astonishing amounts of alcohol consumed within the royal residence. The court's appetite was insatiable, with hundreds of gallons of wine and ale disappearing each month. Henry himself indulged daily, beginning with strong ale at breakfast and often pairing his meals with wine that would outclass even the finest modern vintages. Though spirits were scarce, his preferred drinks were high alcohol options, including rich, sweet claret and imported sack, consumed in quantities that indicated an intent far beyond mere social enjoyment. Contextualizing this behavior within the era is crucial. The drinking water in cities like London was notoriously unsafe, prompting many, including children, to opt for small beer instead. However, Henry's level of consumption transcended normal hydration needs, evolving into a continual ritual of excess. This lifestyle exacted a toll on his health, one that didn't go unnoticed even among his courtiers. Once an athletic and revered figure, he succumbed to an entirely altered state, bloated, with limited mobility and ravenous inflammation. His later life was marred by ailments, gout, leg ulcers, insomnia, and relentless pain, all linked to his gluttonous diet heavy with rich foods and exacerbated by his proclivity for drink. Historians posit that these indulgences accelerated his decline. As his body deteriorated, so too did his disposition transform. The charismatic young king morphed into a figure of tyranny and paranoia. The causes of his mental and physical decline remain speculative, tied perhaps to head trauma, the burdens of ruling, or liver deterioration wrought by years of heavy drinking. The evidence is hard to ignore: a cycle of substantial drinking, diminishing health, volatile moods, and unpredictable political choices. Yet, in this instance, addiction was cloaked in the robes of royalty. Few dared to challenge the king's habits, as they were woven into the fabric of divine governance. What was seen as excess became emblematic of his majesty. Wine flowed freely and without reproach within the court, where questions about Henry's consumption remained unasked and unaddressed. In a broader narrative, Henry's relationship with alcohol sheds light on a normalized acceptance, an intrinsic facet of his persona, akin to his crown or his notorious temperament, serving purposes of celebration, diplomacy, escapism, and resilience. But he was not alone in this affinity for drink. A century later, another monarch would emerge, carrying forth the tradition of cloaking vulnerabilities with elixirs masquerading as remedies. This king, whose reign would be characterized by renewal, charm, and an exploration of curiosity in potions, was none other than Charles II, the sovereign who embraced every cordial that crossed his path. Charles II, the monarch draped in a crown of paradoxes, stepped back into England after years of rigid Cromwellian rule, infusing the nation with laughter, theatre, and a zest for all things extravagant. His reign, which lasted from 1660 to 1685, was marked by indulgence, where he navigated the throne with a goblet in one hand and a prescription vial in the other. The royal court transformed into a lavish carnival of excess, and there stood Charles, a living embodiment of remedies, pharmaceuticals, and enigmatic substances. He displayed an outward vivacity, blending intelligence and a curious pragmatism, captivating those around him without the might of force but rather with charm and wit. Yet, beneath the surface lay the reality of a ruler grappling with anxiety and restlessness, driven to consume a variety of tonics that spoke to the medical beliefs of the 17th century. Health then was synonymous with a potent array of cordials, tinctures, and tonics, often containing ingredients that today would be approached with skepticism. Charles had a particular affection for medicinal cordials, intricate blends of wine, sugar, herbs, and sometimes opiates or even mercury, all not arising from shady corners but rather prescribed by esteemed royal doctors. These concoctions, meticulously recorded and occasionally crafted in royal kitchens, could include unusual components like crushed pearls or gold leaf. However, the foundation of these mixtures was invariably strong alcohol, delivering whatever miracle ingredient promised to revitalize the royal spirit. Among these, Godfrey cordial stood out, an infamous blend of opium and alcohol deemed a cure-all for myriad ailments, from coughs to melancholy. His medicine chest overflowed with such remedies and herbal distillations, with court records documenting their constant arrival to support the king amid his demanding public life. These elixirs facilitated his daily engagements, blurring the boundary between medicinal use and public performance, as the convivial atmosphere of the court relied on the generous consumption of wine and ale during banquets and ceremonies, a means to foster joy, loyalty, and a collective forgetfulness of their tumultuous past. Yet, despite the merriment, Charles's health declined as he aged. Chronic digestive troubles and other mysterious afflictions plague him, likely exacerbated by the very potions intended for healing. When his life came to a close in 1685, his body bore the visible signs of relentless medicinal consumption, marked by desperate treatments, cupping, bleeding, and numerous cordials, yet he maintained his affable demeanor. Charles II passed away as he lived, wrapped in charm amid a haze of bittersweet remedies, embodying a structured, ceremonial dependence concealed as a path to wellness. However, not all monarchs veiled their vices with such finesse. The next ruler, who would oversee England and Scotland, would fall deeply in love with intoxicating comforts, ultimately succumbing to the very dependence he claimed was revitalizing. His name was James II of England and James VI of Scotland, forever clutching a Bible in one hand and a bottle in the other, a poignant testament to the cyclical nature of power and addiction. In the annals of British history, King James I of England, who also bore the title James VI of Scotland, stands as a figure shrouded in paradox. While Charles II represented a reign full of merriment and theatrical flair, James was a ruler whose very essence seemed to embody contradictions. A thinker and a ruler, steeped in theology yet marked by obsession, James heralded the Stuart dynasty with a mind cluttered by scripture and a cabinet brimming with eccentric elixirs. His drinking wasn't a form of rebellion or revelry. Instead, it was a balm for his frayed nerves, reliant not on the chaos of taverns, but on his so-called medicated cordials. These were concocted with precision, drawing from both deep-rooted tradition and the uncharted territories of speculation under the scrutiny of royal physicians. Ruling from 1603 to 1625, he came to England bearing not only 2 crowns but also a heavy burden of insecurities, wrestling with an intellect that led him to ponder essays on everything from kingship to witch trials, famously commissioning the King James Bible in the process. Yet beneath this scholarly exterior lay a persistent dread of illness, particularly the plague. A hypochondriac long before the term existed, his obsession with health bordered on ritual. As is common for many anxious rulers, he turned to a range of substances masquerading as medicine. James's medicinal cordials were touted as panaceas, alcohol-infused brews mixed with exotic herbs and various animal components, sometimes even containing traces of opiates or heavy metals. At the time, these mixtures were commonplace, a celebrated part of healthcare, seen as remedies that invigorated or calmed depending on the day's state of affairs. Frequently, James indulged in these concoctions under the watchful eyes of apothecaries and foreign doctors. Notable ingredients included baywar stone, believed to counteract poison, and gold dust mingled into wine to uplift the spirits. This daily habit might now be deemed the use of controlled substances, but back then, it was simply the royal regimen for self-care. The irony, however, was that James had little penchant for drunkenness. He famously denounced it in his writings, particularly in Basilica Juron, where he admonished his son Henry to avoid the allure of wine. James preferred clarity and virtue, maintaining a facade of moral rectitude in the public eye while discreetly engaging in practices potent enough to blur his perceptions under the guise of health. As the years progressed, James faced increasing exhaustion, digestive ailments, and melancholy. His doctors responded with more potent remedies, more elaborate cordials, and extended recuperation periods between his public appearances. As his health waned, the aging king clung more tightly to his rituals, writing less, traveling less, and surrounding himself with a cadre of healers promising relief. Rather than scandal, his greatest fear loomed as vulnerability. He passed away in 1625, with his demise likely stemming from a stroke compounded by lingering illnesses, but in his final days, he remained steeped in potions that may have done as much harm as they did good. He bequeathed a weary nation, along with a successor poised to explore a different kind of excess. Yet, he would not be the last to seek equilibrium through the drink. Decades later, another king would plunge further into indulgence, forever remembered not for his eloquence but for the shadows of suspicion that clouded his reign, a legacy that still ignites debate to this very day. Richard III, a figure whose narrative flows like a river, twisting and turning through the ages, often misunderstood. Shakespeare's portrayal left him vilified, yet his historical reality lies buried beneath layers of myth and controversy, his likeness hidden under a parking lot. The legacy of this monarch oscillates between the images of villainy and victimhood. Yet, beneath the grasp of political murders and disputed histories lies a nuanced layer often neglected. The chroniclers of the late 15th century portrayed Richard as a man of excess, particularly indulging in drink. This was no fleeting observation or mere poetic flair. Rather, it was a steadfast aspect of his character. In an era when wine and ale were ubiquitous, consumed by the upper and lower classes alike, Richard's drinking habits were notably excessive, even then. As he navigated the uncertain waters of his reign, his alcohol consumption shifted from ceremonial celebration to habitual reliance. Observers noted his increasing volatility, mood swings, and erratic decisions, behaviors often dismissed as symptoms of stress or paranoia but perhaps more indicative of chronic overindulgence. Richard's ascent to the throne was shrouded in ambiguity. The mysterious fates of his nephews loomed large, and his rule became mired in distrust and betrayal, with whispers of treachery permeating the court. In such treacherous times, alcohol may have served dual purposes: a balm for the burdens of his usurped crown, and a catalyst for loose tongues and simmering resentments. Under his command, courtly life was less restrained than under his predecessor, Edward IV. Lavish banquets abounded, toasts were plentiful, and the cellars of York overflowed with wine. He was known for his forthright drinking, especially in private assemblies where strategic plotting intermingled with fine Bordeaux. Richard embraced this culture of drinking, not solely as an escape, but as a statement of fortitude, virility, and possibly divine favor. A king inebriated, while paradoxical, could still command the respect of his peers. He maintained a delicate balance, avoiding public disgrace even as he leaned on the bottle. His death at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, with his legendary cry of, a horse, my kingdom for a horse," sealed his fate as the last English king to perish in battle, heralding the end of the Plantagenets and the dawn of the Tudors. His lifeless form was hastily interred, mocked, and stripped of dignity, yet the whispers of his libations remained, lingering in the shadows of historical texts, waiting for those willing to peer through the veil of theatrical distortion. Richard's strained bond with alcohol, while not entirely exceptional in the medieval landscape, unveils deeper truths. In a tumultuous life overshadowed by doubt and conflict, the drink provided him with an unwavering companion, not for merriment, but for endurance. And as Richard's cup became a steady presence on the battlefield, we turn to our next figure, cloaked not in armor but in the languid luxury of addiction. This was not a king but a man who lived as if the entire realm were his playground. Ian Campbell, the 11th Duke of Argyll, surrounded by a haze of amphetamines, barbiturates, and a waning dukedom. Ian Campbell, the 11th Duke of Argyll, stands as a perplexing figure in the annals of British aristocracy. While many nobles inherit estates, some pass down a legacy, and Campbell possessed both. If the crown aimed to portray a polished image, Campbell revealed the chaos lurking beneath, marked by cruelty and chronic overindulgence in substances. Though not a monarch himself, he was undeniably linked to royal bloodlines, living in a shadowy orbit around the throne. His life narrates a poignant tale of how addiction intertwines with entitlement in elite society. Born into vast wealth, Campbell served with distinction during World War II, returning home harboring deep psychological and physical scars. Despite his bravery, he soon developed a taste for risk and a belief that the world owed him pleasure, whether in the form of cash, compliance, or chemicals. By the time he claimed the dukedom in 1949, he was well on the path toward notoriety as one of Britain's lavishly destructive aristocrats. Addiction didn't merely flirt with him. It became an integral guest in his life. His habits were both varied and alarming, involving alcohol, amphetamines, and barbiturates, often concocted in unpredictable ways. Mornings kicked off with pep pills, flowing into a haze of liquor throughout the day, and nights capped off with sleeping aids to balance his highs. This orchestration of substance use unfolded against the backdrop of a scandalous marriage to Margaret Wigham, later known as the Duchess of Argyll. A glamorous inception soured into a battleground of class strife, addiction, and resentment. Margaret labelled Ian as a volatile man, deeply reliant on intoxicants and often unable to function without them. Their divorce captivated the nation, especially during the sensational trial of 1963, where Ian unveiled damning evidence of his wife's infidelities, overshadowing his own tumultuous behavior. His spiraling addiction and emotional volatility remained largely unexamined amidst the frenzy. Observers noted how his substance use escalated during their marriage, often serving as self-medication amidst confusion and chaos. Ian's dependence on alcohol and drugs was an open secret among those close to him. Friends, staff, and legal advisors often witnessed him inebriated or excessively stimulated. His management of the family estate, Vera Raycastle, highlighted impulsivity and escalating debts, signalling the slow decline of one of Scotland's cherished ancestral homes. Although the castle's splendour persisted, its core crumbled under the strain of Ian's unravelling life. By the time of his death in 1973, he left his family fractured and a legacy marred by controversy, legal woes, and public disgrace. His addiction, never diagnosed or treated, became a mere footnote in the larger narrative of aristocratic dysfunction, excused away as eccentric behavior or stress-induced escapism. Yet, it was only half the tale. Margaret Campbell, the Duchess, emerged as a figure of scandal in her own right, scrutinized for her actions, her sexuality, and her complicated relationship with prescription drugs. Together, Ian and Margaret's stories reveal not just individuals, but an intricate tapestry woven with threads of addiction, class struggles, and the complexities of love and destruction within aristocracy. Margaret Campbell, the Duchess of Argyll, often dubbed the Dirty Duchess, symbolizes more than just the scandalous image projected by mid-century Britain's tabloids. For her, the narrative weaves a tale of betrayal, loneliness, and a reliance on substances forming a blurry line between treatment and escape. Beneath the surface of pearls and media frenzy lay a woman of remarkable charm, significant wealth, and a troubling dependence on pills. Born Margaret Wigham in 1912 into privilege, she faced the weight of high societal expectations, first marrying American millionaire Charles Sweeney, and later, Ian Campbell, the 11th Duke of Argyll, a union that cast her into the realms of both nobility and tabloid infamy. Yet, decades before her disturbing public decline, Margaret's journey was marked by personal challenges. A grey fall that fractured her skull in her 20s altered her demeanour, leaving her more isolated and reliant on medication's quiet comforts. Such dependence was not uncommon among women in her social sphere, as sedatives were frequently prescribed to soothe the anxieties of the elite, creating a culture in which withdrawal symptoms faded into the background. As her tumultuous marriage to Ian Campbell unfolded, a harsh cycle emerged. His struggles with alcohol and drugs fostered an environment where Margaret's prescription use escalated, not as a form of rebellion but as a means to cope. Observers at Invercastle remarked on her sedated state during turbulent marital moments. The specifics of her prescription sources remain ambiguous, yet the emotional toll of her dependence was palpable. The dramatic events surrounding their divorce in 1963 painted her as a scandalous figure, overshadowing the deeper issues of her mental health and addiction. Following this media spectacle, Margaret's health and financial status plummeted. Her presence faded from high society until she found herself living in a nursing home. Visitors noted her foggy state, struggling to converse while still maintaining a semblance of her former elegance. Lipstick expertly applied, hair meticulously arranged. The sedatives that had accompanied her life continued their role in quieting her existence, ultimately leading to her death in 1993, largely forgotten by the very society that once thrived on her narratives of decline. Beneath the harsh judgments of the press lay the profound reality of a woman trapped in dependency within an aristocratic culture that normalized such struggles behind a veil of silk. Yet, she was not alone in her plight. Another noble soul, living a similarly complex existence, was Henry Somerset, the 8th Duke of Beaufort, whose life also danced in and out of decadence amidst the opium haze of 19th century aristocracy. In the 19th century, amidst the charm of opulent fox hunts and refined gatherings, Henry Somerset, the 8th Duke of Beaufort, navigated the intricacies of high society, straddling the refined traditions of nobility with shadows of a deeper, more enigmatic side. As a leading figure among Britain's elite, Somerset possessed immense wealth, land, and influence. He served as Master of the Horse to Queen Victoria and entertained royalty at the splendid Badminton House, embodying the grandeur expected of his stature. Yet, beneath his polished exterior, lurked whispers of a more discreet companion, opium. In Victorian Britain, opium held a dual identity. It was both a common medicine and a fashionable indulgence. Readily available, it bridged social classes, as ordinary as a cup of tea. The substance was featured in medical prescriptions, found its way into the pages of literary works, and was chronicled in the diaries of both clergy and nobility alike. It offered relief for ailments, soothed nerves, and quelled the unrest many felt within. For Henry Somerset, opium transcended mere treatment. It became a way of life. Biographical insights suggest a man increasingly reliant on this substance to navigate both his physical ailments and emotional turbulence. Somerset faced persistent health issues, often linked to stress and bouts of melancholy, an all too common diagnosis in that era. Doctors at the time would have readily prescribed opiates to someone of his stature, as there was no stigma attached to such use. Rather, it was regarded as a sophisticated method of coping. What began as a medicinal necessity gradually morphed into a habitual reliance. As the years passed, Somerset seemed to withdraw from the more energetic realms of public life. Although he continued to engage in courtly and ceremonial duties, he preferred the solace of his estates far from London's bustle. His letters from this period grew decidedly shorter, increasingly vague, and at times wandered in tone. Those close to him observed an emotional distance. Somerset appeared physically present yet emotionally dulled, whether due to a self-imposed retreat or the haze of opiates remains uncertain. The Duke of Beaufort transformed into a more subdued presence as time wore on, yet society remained unperturbed. His title shielded him from scrutiny. His altered habits went unchallenged. In many ways, his opium consumption mirrored the aristocracy's complex relationship with addiction. functioning quietly within the cultural norms of sophistication. Upon his passing in 1899 at the age of 84, Somerset was celebrated for his service, loyalty, and contributions to the rustic charm of English life. However, his struggles with dependency went unnoticed, seamlessly incorporated into the mythos of noble endurance. Yet, even the facade of aristocratic poise could not disguise the stark realities of substance use. In another era, in another household marked by privilege, the delicate line between social indulgence and hidden dependency would blur once more. This time, it would involve a woman raised in affluence and married into a dynasty, remembered not only for her name but for her private battles, none other than Clare Boothe Luce, Viscountess Astor. Clare Boothe Luce, the Viscountess Astor, was not born into royalty. Rather, she stormed into the British elite with the relentless vigor of an American tempest adorned in high heels. A playwright, war correspondent, U.S. ambassador, and eventually a viscountess through marriage, her life unfolded like a cinematic narrative, brilliant, sharp, and intricately layered. Beneath the opulent facade and polished diplomacy, however, lay a more somber tale marked by sorrow, illness, and a troubling reliance on alcohol and sedatives. Her union with Henry Luce, founder of Time and Life magazines, granted her considerable sway in American public life. Yet, tragedy struck in 1967 with his passing, compounded by the devastating loss of her only daughter in a car accident. This personal upheaval propelled Clare into the enclosed world of the British aristocracy through her marriage to the Astor family. Here, the norms dictated an adherence to strict social graces and an unspoken code of emotional restraint, a climate where substance use remained unchallenged and discreet, a combination that proved perilous. In the wake of her ambassadorship, friends and biographers would characterize Clare as increasingly introspective and withdrawn, grappling with what was politely termed emotional fatigue. Candid accounts reveal late-night drinking sessions, prolonged solitude, and a mounting dependence on sleeping pills and tranquilizers, substances that gained acceptance among the elite by the 1970s. For Clare, these pills were not merely indulgent but rather an escape from the escalating silence surrounding her life, a silence that grew heavier as her public presence waned. Once a dynamic voice writing Broadway plays and engaging fiercely in political discourse, Clare's wit began to fade into sporadic and fragmented letters as her inner turmoil deepened. Friends narrated tales of erratic moods and evenings overshadowed by excessive drinking, leading to melancholic afternoons lost in lengthy slumbers. Despite her struggles, she was never openly labeled as an addict, nor did she acknowledge it, allowing the unspoken stigma of her aristocratic silence to convey her struggles. Clare passed away in 1987 at the age of 84, leaving a legacy enriched with her artistic contributions and a complex political footprint, alongside a personal battle that slipped under the radar of public awareness. Her dependency was neither dramatic nor overtly destructive. It was subtle and sophisticated, masquerading as self-care within her luxurious surroundings. Yet Clare was not an outlier, as the narratives of the British upper class are peppered with similar tales of individuals ensnared by the burdens of their titles and the haunting spectres of their tragedies, all cloaked in the guise of refined restraint. Lord Randolph Churchill, a disappearing legend of Victorian politics. Before Winston Churchill etched his name in the annals of history, his father, Lord Randolph Churchill, dazzled the political landscape of late Victorian England. He was a figure of brilliance, shining yet often unpredictable, endowed with an intellect that many found both captivating and daunting. To the public eye, Randolph was a hopeful star of the Conservative Party and a maestro of parliamentary drama, seemingly on a path to lead an empire. Yet, hidden beneath his articulate facade was a man wrestling with the burdens of his own making. Exhaustion, pressure, and a notorious struggle with both alcohol and medication remained cloaked in shadows unknown to most. Born in 1849 as the third son of the 7th Duke of Marlborough, he embodied the weighty expectations of his lineage but lacked the cautious temperament often expected of the highest society. His ascent up the political ladder was nothing short of meteoric. By his late 30s, he had already ascended to the significant role of Chancellor of the Exchequer. With charm, audacity, and an unfiltered nature, he had the unique ability to enthrall audiences while also polarizing the very government he served. However, as rapidly as he climbed, his health began to decline, leading to murmurs about his peculiar behavior and erratic mood changes, whispers that hinted at a life unraveling. In the Victorian era, the language to describe mental struggles was practically non-existent. When Lord Randolph displayed signs of both physical deterioration and cognitive decline, the public's diagnosis was ambiguous, typically resorting to the term general paralysis of the insane, a broad label for myriad psychological and neurological issues. In hindsight, conjectures about his declining health range from late-stage syphilis to brain tumors to degenerative conditions. Among these theories, a haunting possibility lingers: a spiraling dependency on alcohol and possibly morphine. In the atmosphere of Parliament, drinking was as ordinary as paper. Long discussions, late-night votes, and private clubs fostered an environment where intoxication lost its status as a vice and became an everyday ritual. Lord Randolph, whose sharp wit often masked deeper insecurities, reportedly relied on alcohol as a coping mechanism amid the intense pressures of governance and personal anxiety. Moreover, those in his circles acknowledged that he was also treated with opiates, likely morphine, then considered a cure-all for pains, insomnia, anxiety, and even digestive issues. For a man of his wealth and connections, prescriptions flowed easily, and reliance on such chemical comforts became a norm. As his health declined, clarity slipped further away. His eloquent speeches morphed into incoherence, and the once astute mind he possessed began to fracture. Lord Randolph's life tragically ended in 1895 at only 45 years old, his official cause of death shrouded in ambiguity, accompanied by speculation, guesswork, and the disappointment of his family. By the time he passed, he had transformed into the spectre of the vibrant figure who had once electrified the halls of Parliament. In the quiet aftermath of his decline, his son, Winston, quietly observed and absorbed vital lessons. Lord Randolph's downfall wasn't marked by scandal in the traditional sense. It unfolded quietly, veiled in the respectable jargon of illness. Yet, behind the doors of elite doctors and private social clubs, one could discern the contours of dependency comforted by societal acceptance but never truly acknowledged for its reality. Generations later, a different branch of the Churchill legacy would emerge. Far from political grandeur, and deeply entrenched within the vibrant chaos of 1990s London nightlife, Lady Sarah Spencer Churchill would not conceal her drug use but instead confront it openly, marking another chapter in the family's turbulent narrative. In the corridors of power and tradition, Lady Sarah Spencer Churchill emerged as an intriguing anomaly. Born into the illustrious lineage of the Dukes of Marlborough and connected to the formidable Winston Churchill, Lady Sarah possessed the advantages of wealth and prestige. Yet, she chose to diverge from the expected path of her aristocratic heritage, choosing instead to speak candidly about her life decisions. Raised in the lavish surrounds of Blenheim Palace, which stood as a symbol of imperial legacy and not just a mere residence, she felt the constraints of her family's expectations acutely. The year was 1951, and as Lady Sarah blossomed into adulthood, she sought avenues that lay outside the traditional constraints for women of her stature. Rather than attending debutante balls or engaging in charitable endeavors, she explored art, embraced independent travel, and immersed herself in London's dynamic creative scene during the cultural renaissance of the 70s and 80s. This was a period marked by rebellion, where punk culture challenged established norms and cloistered elites began mingling with avant-garde movements. For many, this was merely a fleeting dalliance. For Lady Sarah, it became a profound lifestyle. Her candid foray into cocaine use, publicly discussed and devoid of any glorification, illustrated a stark contrast to the usual euphemistic language employed by her peers dealing with similar issues. Where others would mask their struggles with phrases like bad nerves, Lady Sarah named her reality head-on: cocaine use and the ensuing challenges and recovery process. Her relationship with her lineage was complex and often tension-filled. She found herself adrift, perceived as too privileged by bohemians and too straightforward for the aristocracy. Yet this duality only heightened her intrigue. Unapologetically, she shared her narrative, preserving its multifaceted nature without succumbing to self-pity or pretense. Gradually distancing herself from the vibrant party lifestyle, Lady Sarah gravitated back toward her painting and embraced a quieter existence. Although her later years were largely away from public scrutiny, they were marked by creativity and introspection. She never aimed to serve as a role model. However, in her honesty about addiction, she carved a unique space within the aristocratic elite, one that gleamed with authenticity rather than the facade of perfection. Just as she settled into this new chapter, Lady Victoria Harvey entered the scene, a new figure of note entwined in the glitzy world of the early 2000s, yet sharing a similar openness about her vices, highlighting the evolving narrative of aristocracy in modern times. In the early 2000s, if the British aristocracy had a tabloid darling, it would undoubtedly be Lady Victoria Harvey. Born to the 6th Marquis of Bristol, and the culmination of generations steeped in intricate dysfunction, she transformed the expectations of noble conduct into an artful spectacle. No mere spectator of the party scene, Victoria essentially became the heartbeat of it. With her ethereal presence, she oscillated between the roles of an it girl, model, columnist, and reality TV star, adapting to the fickle nature of fame with effortless grace. Unlike her more demure relatives, she embraced notoriety, walking straight into the lens of every camera, often draped in couture and spouting quotable remarks by dawn. Yet, behind her designer shades and glamorous socialite facade lay a familiar narrative that many aristocrats faced, a quest for oblivion shrouded in a lifestyle. Victoria spoke candidly and brazenly of her nightlife escapades. From the glitzy streets of Mayfair to the lively clubs of Miami, she navigated high-end venues with a nonchalance typical of someone accustomed to admiration and opens doors. When secrets were whispered about her, she effortlessly turned the tables and owned her narrative. In interviews, she confirmed her use of party drugs like ecstasy and cocaine, deeming them commonplace among her circle. Everyone was doing it, she quipped, implying that to abstain would make her stand out more than participating. Unlike her predecessors who found solace in discreet prescriptions, Victoria's escapades were public and unapologetic. She wasn't indulging to suppress anxiety from royal duties. She danced to challenge the line between rebellion and pleasure. However, the intrigue doesn't solely lie in the drugs but in the societal context in which they thrived, the emotional valleys they masked, and the performances they facilitated. Growing up within a fractured family, she faced loss early on. Her father's death from illness and addiction left a mark on her legacy. The Harvey family, once symbols of aristocratic stability, morphed into examples of excessive living. While many might recoil in shame, Victoria catapulted herself into the spotlight. In a world enamored with fame, she mastered its nuanced language, inhabiting magazine covers and red carpets like a seasoned performer. Her social escapades became her business model, with substances serving as mere accessories within the spectacle. Over the years, her persona shifted. Parties became infrequent, and interviews more curated. In these reflections, she acknowledged regrets, lessons learned, and the isolation veiled by the glamour. However, she never fully distanced herself from her past or the substances that once guided her through it. Victoria's brand of aristocracy was starkly different, lacking powdered wigs and genteel propriety, replaced instead with neon lights and a defiant refusal to apologize. Yet, her journey is not singular. It resonates within a broader tale. When privilege encounters pressure, the path to liberation often leads to chemicals, ensnaring even those distanced from the central royal lineage burdened by shared history and inherited sorrow. One such individual, who often drifted into the shadows, grappled quietly with a dependency on painkillers stemming from sickness, loss, and medical oversights. This lesser-known name was Princess Christina of the Netherlands. Princess Christina of the Netherlands, a story spun from the fabric of royalty yet tinged with shadows. Born as the youngest child of Queen Juliana, she existed in the delicate balance of royal life, neither fully embraced by the grandeur of the throne nor entirely outside its reach. This existence afforded her a sense of freedom, yet it also bred isolation, a solitude where internal struggles flourished, kept hidden from the world. A dependency on painkillers would quietly creep into her life, a persistent battle fought behind locked doors. Christina entered the world in 1947, burdened from the start. Her royal lineage offered no refuge from the realities of partial blindness, a consequence of her mother's battle with rubella during pregnancy. In a family defined by its obsession with perfection, Christina's condition was a symbolic challenge. Yet, rather than succumb to pity, she forged her own path. She pursued music in Canada, taught singing in New York, and crafted an independent life apart from the main royal residence in The Hague. Yet, chronic pain would linger throughout her journey, quietly amplifying her struggles. Unlike her more publicity-drenched royal counterparts, Christina's health issues went largely unnoticed in the public eye, with Dutch society pages documenting her hardships discreetly. As she faced rigorous medical treatments, sources close to her hinted at an evolving reliance on prescribed pain medications. This was no scandalous revelation. It was simply understood within the quiet confines of royal life. While she never spoke publicly of her medication usage, those who were close to her recognized the telltale signs: fatigue, withdrawal, and inconsistencies that hinted at deeper issues. What strikes a chord in Christina's narrative is its resonance. Her plight reflects a broader truth among aristocrats: the medicalization of discomfort, the numbing of grief through dosages, and the silence shrouding dependency. Christina evaded public disgrace. Unlike others, she wasn't seen stumbling into the limelight during troubling times. Instead, she aged with grace, shared occasional insights through interviews, and remained fiercely private about her battles. Yet, the shadows of illness and medication use stalked her final years, culminating in her death in 2019 following a struggle with bone cancer. Her passing elicited heartfelt tributes, emphasizing her artistry and spirit. The royal family released a statement extolling her kindness and independence, all of which was undoubtedly true. However, beneath the surface lay a tale seldom told, about the quiet, often invisible struggles of royal dependency, played out in dimly lit rooms over countless days and measured doses. A stark contrast arises when one considers those whose battles become starkly visible in public arenas, where titles offer no shield against addiction in a brutal display. Such is the tale of the Marquis of Blandford, now the Duke of Marlborough, reminding us that the narrative of royalty is as complex as it is captivating. The 29th Marquis of Blandford, now known as the Duke of Marlborough, represents a lineage that has loomed large in the realm of British aristocracy for centuries. Blenheim Palace, their opulent residence, is far more than mere bricks and mortar. It stands as a testament to the legacies of power, warfare, and heritage. Yet, as the title transitioned to James Spencer Churchill, the 12th Duke of Marlborough, its prestigious legacy was overshadowed by personal challenges. Here was a man whose reputation diverged sharply from his forebears, renowned not for gallant military exploits or diplomatic achievements, but for a tumultuous life marked by addiction, repeated arrests, and a well-documented crisis of self. James, born in 1955 into a lineage that boasts connections to Winston Churchill and Britain's original Duke of Marlborough, was expected to nurture the legacy of his illustrious family. However, his early years devolved into a cascade of tumult and consequences, including multiple incarcerations and a very public battle against heroin and cocaine addiction. Unlike the concealed struggles of his ancestors, James' troubles unfolded in the glaring light of tabloid scrutiny throughout the 80s and 90s. He was often labeled as the dissolute Duke, living a life under the watchful gaze of society. His own father publicly threatened to disinherit him, fearing not just financial ruin but the tarnishing of their family's dignity. The incidents surrounding him read as a saga of aristocratic downfall, wild parties transforming into police interventions, missing inheritances, drug-related charges, estrangements, and even an eviction effort from Blenheim Palace itself. His addiction, deep-rooted and unapologetic, painted a portrait of a man both magnetic and self-destructive, alluring one moment, unraveling the next. Yet within James' captivating narrative lies not just his descent but an arduous journey through recovery. As the years turned toward the 2000s, following various unsuccessful rehab attempts and family interventions, he began to engage with his demons earnestly. With patient resolve, he inched away from the precipice. He found love, welcomed children into his life, and gradually embraced the responsibilities tied to his estate. In 2014, the death of his father conferred upon him the dukedom and the palace, a place that had once epitomized his disgrace now transformed into his new duty. In the present day, the 12th Duke candidly shares his past experiences. He is involved in addiction awareness efforts, contributing to recovery charities and championing mental health causes. His journey is a rarity within British nobility, a tale of one born with immense privilege who publicly navigated the chaos of his life and leveraged that visibility to discuss recovery candidly. Yet, the shadows of his past linger ominously. His narrative underscores the profound notion that addiction is undeterred by societal status. It can infiltrate the highest echelons of privilege just as readily as it can touch the most vulnerable corners of society. But alongside James' well-publicized struggles is the quieter story of Lady Rose McLaren, whose battle, while less sensational, was equally poignant and resonant. Her lived experience, much like those of many women in the upper echelons of British society, unfolded not amidst dramatic crises but through a gradual, insidious dependence, one that deserves to be heard and understood. Lady Rose McLaren. Unlike many of her peers, she gracefully sidestepped the limelight, allowing her life to flourish in the subtle, refined corners of British high society. With a wit that sparkled and a discretion that disarmed, she was a steadfast friend of Princess Margaret, weaving effortlessly through London's sophisticated dinner parties from the 1950s to the 1980s. With her ever-present glass and sharp one-liners, she became an indelible figure, cloaked in charm amidst her privileged surroundings. Born into the esteemed Payday family, Rose seamlessly entered the aristocratic realm, eventually marrying Major David McLean and securing her status among royal circles through her innate charm and social connections. Yet it was her bond with Princess Margaret that truly etched her legacy into cultural memory. Their camaraderie was well known. Shopping excursions, leisurely lunches, and vacations filled with laughter showcased a profound companionship. Rose emerged as a confidant, an adept gossiper, and a keeper of secrets, navigating a world where drinking transformed from mere indulgence into a necessary social currency. In post-war Britain, alcohol became ever present across societal strata, particularly within the aristocracy, where afternoons were accompanied by gin and evenings sealed with port. For ladies like Rose, who were not expected to engage in traditional work, it served as a socially sanctioned means of alleviation. At first, this lifestyle complemented her existence, a private affair shrouded in elegance, yet as years unfolded, those in her circle began to sense a decline. The vivacious hostess transitioned to a quieter version of herself. Her humor became more scarce, her stories less articulate. By the late 1980s, whispers of Rose's battle with alcohol dependence began to circulate, a truth she would later acknowledge with an aristocratic nonchalance. No dramatic confessions, just a calm recognition that her once jovial habit had morphed into a dependence. In the absence of intervention or public turmoil, she gradually receded from her social engagements, diminishing the vibrant nights that once characterized her life. The essence of her tale resonates with both the ordinary and the extraordinary, a woman of privilege, encapsulated by societal expectations, navigating her existence with wit and charm, until alcohol became a crutch that dulled the edges of her reality. Lady Rose McLaren left this world in 2005, aged 87. Her obituaries celebrated her social elegance and royal ties, though they discreetly omitted any mention of her struggles with addiction, perhaps because, in her social realm, such matters were too taboo to acknowledge. Thus, her narrative concludes not in scandal but in a gentle sigh, the story of 30 royals and aristocrats entangled with substances that both masked pain and facilitated survival. They all remind us that royalty offers no shield against suffering. It merely imparts the art of concealment.